I'm Lauren Ellison. I'm 34. And when my daughter whispered, "Mom, hide under the bed," I didn't ask why. Because something in her voice broke something in me. I had just given birth. I was sore, stitched, still bleeding. But I grabbed my baby, grabbed the four-pole, and crawled under a hospital bed like a ghost hiding in my own life. And what I heard from under there shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Before I tell you everything, tell me, where are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. The pediatric ward at St. Grace Hospital smelled like baby powder and fluorescent light. It should have felt warm, familiar. But I felt like a prisoner. I'd given birth to my son, Caleb, just 30 hours before. He was perfect. I wasn't. My body, a patchwork of pain and exhaustion, was a stranger to me. Every breath felt shallow, every movement a deliberate effort against the weight of fatigue and the constant throb where a new life had emerged. The fluorescent lights hummed, a relentless buzz that mirrored the dull ache behind my eyes. The hospital bed, with its thin mattress and crisp, starched sheets, offered little comfort. I stared at the ceiling, at the faint water stains that looked like forgotten constellations, and wondered when I would feel like myself again. Or if I ever would. Nurses came and went, a parade of efficiency and routine, but one Rachel stayed too long. Her presence was a subtle wrong note in the symphony of the ward. Her smile was tight, her eyes, though kind in appearance, held a peculiar glint, like a secret just barely contained. She called me Lauren before even glancing at my chart, a familiarity that pricked at my unease. Most nurses used my last name, a professional distance I had come to expect and appreciate. Rachel was different. She leaned in too close when she spoke, her voice a low murmur, almost conspiratorial. And the medicine she gave me? It wasn't the usual pain reliever. It was something heavier, something that plunged me into a sleep so profound, so utterly uncharacteristic, that I missed 2 feedings. 2 whole feedings with my newborn son. I never sleep through feedings. Never. My internal clock, honed by years of motherhood, was infallible. But under Rachel's care, it had utterly failed me. The next morning, a fog still clung to my mind. My head felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, telling myself it was just the exhaustion of childbirth, the natural confusion of a new mother. But a knot of dread, small yet persistent, began to tighten in my stomach. When the charge nurse made her rounds, I hesitated, then finally mentioned Rachel's overly familiar demeanor, the strange way she seemed to linger, and the unexpected depth of sleep her medication had induced. The charge nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense air, simply smiled. "Rachel? Oh, she's one of our best. Been with us for years. You must be very tired, dear." Her words, meant to reassure, only deepened my unease. If Rachel was one of their best, why did she feel so off? Why did her presence feel less like comfort and more like a subtle, creeping intrusion? The knot tightened further, a cold, hard lump in my chest. I dismissed it, or tried to. Blamed it on postpartum hormones, on the lack of sleep, on the sheer overwhelming newness of having 2 children. But the feeling lingered, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a whisper in the quiet moments. Then Lily, my 8-year-old, came to visit. Her arrival was a burst of sunshine, her bright eyes and eager smile a momentary balm to my frayed nerves. She clutched me like she hadn't seen me in weeks, her small arms encircling my neck with an intensity that surprised me. I ran my fingers through her soft hair, inhaling the familiar scent of bubblegum and playground dust, and, for a moment, the world felt right again. But when I asked what was wrong, what had made her cling to me so fiercely, her eyes, usually so full of laughter, clouded over. Her voice, usually so confident and clear, dropped to a whisper, barely audible above the hushed hospital sounds. "I saw that nurse with Daddy. They were whispering outside. She said, 'We'll do it tonight.' And Dad said, 'Not yet.'" The words hung in the air, a chilling echo. My blood ran cold. The comfortable, familiar hospital room suddenly felt alien, menacing. The knot in my stomach solidified into a block of ice. Lily's innocent words, delivered with the absolute certainty of a child who believes what she sees, were a jolt, a violent shake that dislodged the carefully constructed facade of my life. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile her statement with the man I knew, the husband who had promised forever. Whispering outside, "We'll do it tonight? Not yet?" What could possibly connect my husband, the man who had held my hand through every contraction, with a nurse, a stranger, in the shadowy corners of a hospital hallway, discussing something so ominous? The questions swirled, a dizzying maelstrom of fear and confusion. And in that moment, the sterile white walls of the hospital transformed into the confines of a cage. I was no longer just recovering. I was trapped. And the present, once a sanctuary of new motherhood, had become a perilous, uncertain space. Our life, before Caleb, before this sterile, humming ward, had been a tapestry woven with comfortable routines and shared moments. It hadn't been a grand romance, not in the dramatic, movie script sense, but it was sturdy, reliable, built on years of shared history and quiet understanding. Our evenings often unfolded in a predictable, comforting rhythm. Michael would come home from his law office, his tie loosened, a faint scent of old paper and city air clinging to him. He'd kick off his shoes by the door, and Lily, a whirlwind of energy, would launch herself into his arms, demanding to be swung upside down. He'd laugh, a deep, resonant sound that always made me smile, and then settle onto the sofa, pulling her onto his lap for a quick story or a round of tickle monsters. Dinner was usually a joint effort, a quiet choreography in our spacious, sun-drenched kitchen. The aroma of garlic and onions sizzling in olive oil, the gentle clatter of pottery, the soft hum of the dishwasher, these were the soundtracks of our evenings. I'd chop vegetables, my hands moving with practiced ease, while Michael, surprisingly adept for a man who claimed to only excel at legal briefs, would tackle the protein. We talked about our days, the mundane victories and minor frustrations. Lily would chatter about school, her drawings, her latest obsessions. We'd eat at our solid oak dining table, a relic from my grandmother's house, its surface scarred by years of use, now bearing the faint etchings of Lily's crayon adventures. The sunlight would stream through the large window, painting warm stripes across the floor, and, sometimes, if the evening was particularly still, we'd hear the distant call of a dove from the oak tree in our backyard. After dinner, Michael would often help Lily with her homework, patiently explaining fractions or historical events, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he'd read her a bedtime story, his voice a soothing lullaby, until she drifted off to sleep. I'd find him later, in the living room, reading a legal journal or watching a documentary, a glass of whiskey beside him, and we'd talk, sometimes for hours, sometimes in comfortable silence, simply existing in each other's presence. These were the moments, small and seemingly insignificant, that built the foundation of our life, the quiet anchors that tethered us to each other. They were the ordinary details that, in hindsight, painted a vivid picture of what I had believed was true, what I had trusted with every fiber of my being. Our weekends were filled with family rituals. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, a tradition Michael had insisted on since Lily was a toddler. He'd flip them with a flourish, inevitably burning the first one, which always made us laugh. Then we'd head to the park, the air crisp and clean, the scent of freshly cut grass filling our lungs. Lily would chase after butterflies, her laughter echoing through the trees, while Michael and I walked hand in hand, talking about plans for the house or summer vacations, or just the quiet rhythm of our lives. Sundays were for slow mornings, mugs of coffee on the porch, listening to the birds, followed by trips to the local farmer's market. The vibrant colors of fresh produce, the earthy smell of ripe tomatoes, the cheerful chatter of vendors, it all felt like a perfect, sun-drenched painting. We'd come home, arms laden with groceries, and spend the afternoon cooking a big family meal, the kitchen alive with sounds and smells. These were the days I cherished, the moments that defined our family, the quiet assurances that our life was solid, safe, and happy. We had our disagreements, of course. Small spats about finances or forgotten chores or differing opinions on Lily's bedtime. But they felt like minor tremors, quickly smoothed over by apologies and understanding. Nothing that threatened the core of our connection. Nothing that felt like a crack in the foundation. It started subtly, insidiously, with late meetings. Not just occasionally, but almost every other night. Just work stuff, he'd say, his voice a little too casual, his eyes a little too quick to dart away. But then the work stuff bled into weekends, into holidays. He'd be glued to his phone, fingers flying across the screen, a private smile playing on his lips. When I'd ask who he was texting, he'd simply shrug, just a colleague. But he never let me see his phone. It was always face down or tucked away in his pocket, a new, unspoken boundary in our previously transparent lives. He started showering as soon as he came home, not just a quick rinse, but a long, deliberate scrubbing, as if trying to wash away something more than the day's grime. The scent of his usual cologne was replaced by something lighter, floral almost, a scent I didn't recognize, but instinctively disliked. He'd come to bed late, sometimes long after I was asleep, slipping in quietly, almost furtively, as if trying not to wake me. And when he was in bed, he'd turn away, his back to me, the usual comforting warmth of his presence replaced by a chilling distance. He changed even more after I got pregnant again. The joy, the shared excitement I expected, never fully materialized. He was distant. Cold. His eyes, once so full of warmth when they looked at me, now held a guarded, almost vacant expression. Our conversations became clipped, strained. He'd nod absently when I spoke, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. The gentle touches, the spontaneous hugs, the casual intimacies that had defined our marriage dwindled. He stopped asking about my day, about the baby's movements. It was as if a veil had descended between us, thin yet impenetrable. I tried to bridge the gap, to talk to him, to ask what was wrong. He'd simply shrug, or offer a vague, unsatisfying explanation about stress at work, a new demanding case. I tried to believe him. I wanted to believe him. The thought that something darker, more insidious, was at play felt too terrifying to contemplate. But then he'd swing back, buying me flowers, vibrant bouquets of roses that felt more like apologies than gifts. He'd rub my back while I was standing at the kitchen counter, his touch tentative, almost hesitant. He'd say things like, "You're the strongest woman I know," his voice a low murmur, filled with an almost desperate sincerity. I clung to those moments, those fleeting glimpses of the man I loved, the man I thought I knew. I rationalized his distance, telling myself it was stress, the crushing weight of responsibility, maybe even the daunting prospect of fatherhood again. I told myself he was just overwhelmed, that this was just a phase, that the familiar, comforting rhythm of our lives would return. I didn't know he was scared because of what he was hiding. I didn't know he was scared because he had brought it inside the very room where I was meant to recover, inside the sanctuary where I was meant to bring our new life into the world. I didn't know the extent of the rot that had begun to fester beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. I just didn't want to see it. The subtle shifts started to coalesce, forming a pattern that, once noticed, became impossible to ignore. They were like the slow, deliberate turning of a key in a lock, each click a tiny tremor of unease. It wasn't just the late nights anymore, or the guarded phone. It was the way his eyes would flicker away when I asked a direct question, the way his voice would develop a slight tremor when he fabricated an excuse. A forgotten promise here, a missed dinner there, each a small, almost imperceptible chip in the foundation of my trust. One evening, he was supposed to pick up Lily from her art class. He'd been so enthusiastic about it, promising to see her latest clay masterpiece. But he never showed. The art teacher, a kind woman with paint smudges on her apron, called me, her voice laced with concern. I rushed to pick up a tearful Lily, who, despite her usual resilience, felt the sting of her father's absence deeply. When Michael finally arrived home, hours later, he offered a flimsy excuse about a sudden client emergency. His eyes, usually so expressive, were strangely blank, devoid of the genuine remorse I expected. He didn't meet my gaze, instead focusing on the chipped paint on the wall behind me. And when I pressed him, just a little, he snapped, his voice sharp and uncharacteristic. "Can you just believe me for once, Lauren? Do you always have to question everything?" His words, cold and dismissive, hung in the air, a metallic taste in my mouth. It wasn't just the missed pickup, it was the chilling lack of empathy, the sudden defensiveness that felt utterly alien. Then there were the texts. Ambiguous messages that would flash across his screen, too quickly for me to read, but always accompanied by a furtive glance, a sudden clearing of his throat. Once, I saw a string of emojis on his lock screen, a single red rose, a moon, and a winking face. Harmless on their own, perhaps, but when combined with this secretive behavior, they felt like breadcrumbs leading to a dark, unknown forest. I tried to dismiss them, to tell myself it was a coworker, a joke, a misunderstanding. But the seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout, its tendrils wrapping around my heart, squeezing tighter with each passing day. And Rachel. Her presence, even before Lily's chilling revelation, had been a constant, low-level hum of unease. I remember seeing her in the hospital cafeteria one afternoon, her back to me, talking animatedly on her phone. She was laughing, a bright, tinkling sound, and something in the uninhibited joy of her laughter felt wrong. It didn't fit with the somewhat stiff, professional demeanor she adopted in my room. Then she turned, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes met mine. There was a sudden, almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze before she quickly averted her eyes and walked away. It was an odd look, a glance that felt too knowing, too deliberate. It felt like she had been caught. My rational mind tried to explain it away as paranoia, the exhaustion of new motherhood, the general strangeness of hospital life. But the primal instinct, the quiet whisper of intuition, was growing louder, more insistent. Michael's phone became an extension of his body, a closely guarded secret. He'd take it with him everywhere, to the bathroom, to the kitchen, even to bed, tucking it under his pillow. He'd mute it, turn it face down, or even leave the room if a call came in while I was present. The excuses were endless. Work confidentiality, don't want to disturb you, just checking emails. But the pattern was undeniable. It wasn't the behavior of a transparent, loving husband. It was the behavior of someone hiding something significant, something that required constant vigilance. I started to notice other things too. Small discrepancies in his stories, a forgotten detail from a conversation we'd had just days before. He'd sometimes arrive home smelling faintly of a different perfume, not the one I wore, or the generic sense of the hospital. It was light, sweet, undeniably feminine. When I'd ask, he'd brush it off. Must be from a colleague at work, someone leaning in too close. But the explanations felt hollow, like thin tissue paper stretched over a gaping hole. The weight of these accumulating doubts, these ambiguous signals, began to press down on me. My appetite dwindled. Sleep, when it came, was fitful, haunted by fragmented dreams of shadowy figures and whispered secrets. I felt a constant tightness in my chest, a low thrum of anxiety that never fully dissipated. I started watching him, covertly, analyzing his every word, every gesture, searching for a sign, a confirmation of my growing dread. It felt like walking on a thin sheet of ice, knowing at any moment it could crack and plunge me into icy depths. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, felt like it was dissolving, piece by painful piece, into something unrecognizable. I was adrift in a sea of suspicion, clinging to the fading hope that it was all a misunderstanding, a trick of my exhausted mind. But the evidence, small and insidious, was piling up, a relentless, undeniable tide. My world was no longer stable, no longer predictable. It was a shimmering, uncertain mirage on the verge of shattering. And the worst part was, I could feel the shatter coming. I just didn't know when, or how, or who would be holding the hammer. The air was thick with unspoken words, with unacknowledged truths, and the silence was more deafening than any scream. The air in the hospital room grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. Rachel started calling Lily sweetheart, a saccharine term that grated on my nerves. She touched my arm too long when giving meds, her fingers lingering on my skin, a touch that felt less like care and more like ownership. Every movement, Every word from Rachel felt loaded, imbued with a sinister undertone. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, but my body, still recovering, felt like a lead weight. My voice, when I tried to speak, was barely a whisper. I was adrift, a boat without oars, caught in a swirling current of fear and confusion. When I mentioned Rachel's unsettling demeanor to the charge nurse again, her response was dismissive, almost annoyed. "Rachel? She's one of our best. You're just feeling vulnerable, dear. It's common after childbirth." The charge nurse's words were a wall, impenetrable and frustrating. My instincts screamed otherwise, but I had no proof, no concrete evidence, only a growing sense of dread. How could I explain the way Rachel looked at me, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes? How could I articulate the feeling of being watched, of being subtly mocked? It sounded like paranoia, even to my own ears. But Lily saw through it. Her small, sharp mind, unburdened by adult rationalizations, perceived the truth with unblinking clarity. She stared at Rachel with a kind of stillness, a quiet intensity that was unnerving. Her eyes, usually so bright and curious, were narrowed, watchful. She was a tiny sentinel, guarding a secret only she fully understood. "She knows my name, but I never told her," Lily said one afternoon, her voice a low, firm whisper, her gaze fixed on Rachel's retreating back. The simplicity of her observation was devastating. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, an undeniable breach of logic that screamed of something deeply, terribly wrong. Rachel knew Lily's name, not from my chart, not from a casual introduction, but from somewhere else. Somewhere illicit. Somewhere connected to Michael. The pieces, scattered and disparate, were beginning to click into place, forming a picture of betrayal so vast and terrifying that my mind struggled to comprehend it. That night, the hospital room felt suffocating. The moon, a thin sliver of white, cast long, distorted shadows across the floor. Carol, my best friend, my rock, my voice of reason, stepped out to get dinner, promising to be back soon with something warm and comforting. Her absence left a void, a sudden vulnerability in the room. And in that quiet, vulnerable moment, Lily, my brave, intuitive daughter, moved with a sudden urgency. Her eyes, wide and serious, met mine. She didn't speak, not at first. She simply looked at me, a silent plea in her gaze. Then, in a low, firm voice, she said, "Mom." Under the bed. Now. The urgency in her tone, the uncharacteristic command, cut through my exhaustion, through my pain, through the last vestiges of my disbelief. There was no hesitation, no question of why. Something in her voice, in the terrified certainty of her eyes, extinguished all doubt. My body, despite its protests, responded instantly. I moved, not gracefully, but with a raw, primal instinct for survival. I grabbed Caleb, who lay peacefully in his bassinet, his tiny hand curled into a fist, his soft breath a gentle flutter against my cheek. I grabbed the four-pole, its wheels squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. And I crawled. I crawled under the hospital bed, my stitches screaming in protest, the sudden movement a jolt of agony that shot through my weary body. The space was cramped, dark, filled with dust bunnies and discarded thoughts. The air was stale, the metallic tang of hospital cleaner mingling with the faint, comforting scent of my newborn. I pressed myself against the cold metal frame, shielding Caleb with my body, his small, warm form a fragile comfort against the creeping terror. From my hiding place, I watched as Lily, with an almost adult precision, closed the curtains, plunging the room into a deeper, more ominous darkness. She moved silently, her small figure a silhouette against the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the blinds. Then, with a decisive click that echoed loudly in the sudden silence, she locked the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own blood in my ears and Caleb's soft, rhythmic breathing against my chest. And I didn't hesitate. I held my breath, clutching Caleb tighter, listening. The sounds of the hospital, usually a distant hum, now felt magnified, each creak of the floor, each distant cough a potential harbinger of doom. My mind raced, trying to piece together Lily's words, Rachel's behavior, Michael's escalating secrecy. It was all a swirling, terrifying vortex, pulling me down into a terrifying reality. Then the door opened. A soft click, then a gentle swing. Rachel's footsteps. Not hurried, not panicked, but slow, deliberate, almost predatory. Each step echoed in the confined space, vibrating through the metal frame of the bed, sending shivers down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing Caleb closer, willing myself to be invisible. Her voice, a low whisper that seemed to slither through the air, sliced through the silence. Where did she go? The question wasn't laced with concern, but with a chilling impatience. My blood ran cold. She wasn't looking for me because she was worried. She was looking for me because I was an obstacle. I heard her press the call button, the soft electronic chirp a jarring sound in the stillness. Then Michael's voice. His voice, my husband's voice, permeated the darkness, a sickeningly familiar sound. "Where's Lauren?" His tone was laced with a strange mixture of confusion and agitation. The sound of his voice, rather than offering comfort, only intensified the icy grip of dread that tightened around my throat. And Rachel, her voice dropped to a chilling whisper, a venomous hiss that seeped into every pore of my being, said, "Your obstacle will be gone soon. One shot. She'll never wake up." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. My mind screamed in silent protest, recoiling from the sheer horror of her statement. One shot. Never wake up. She was talking about me. She was talking about my death. My breath caught in my throat, a choked gasp that I somehow managed to suppress. Michael's gasp, sharp and sudden, ripped through the air. "What are you saying?" His voice was raw with disbelief, with a sudden, dawning horror. For a fleeting moment, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within me. Perhaps he hadn't known. Perhaps he was as shocked as I was. But that hope was quickly extinguished by Rachel's next words. She hissed, her voice dripping with venom, with a possessive, unsettling anger. "You promised. It'd be you and me. And the baby." The world, already shattered, splintered further. My heart fractured into 1,000 pieces, each shard a searing pain. You and me. And the baby. Not our baby. The baby. Caleb. My innocent, vulnerable newborn. They planned to take him. My husband, the man who had vowed to protect me, to cherish me, had made a promise to another woman, a promise that involved my removal, my permanent absence, and the theft of my child. The betrayal was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. It wasn't just a simple affair, a lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, insidious plot, a cold, ruthless plan to erase me from existence. The quiet devastation I felt was absolute, a profound grief that settled deep in my bones. My entire world, the one I had so carefully constructed, so faithfully believed in, had imploded. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. The man I loved, the father of my children, was a stranger. And the woman he had chosen, his mistress, was standing inches away, holding my fate in her hands. My rock bottom wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was a silent, suffocating descent into the depths of despair, under a hospital bed, holding my baby, listening to the architect of my destruction. This was the moment. The pivotal, shattering moment where everything changed. And there was no going back. Michael's voice broke. A raw, desperate sound that cut through the silence. "I didn't mean this," he pleaded, his voice thick with a sudden, dawning horror. "You're insane. I never wanted her hurt." His words, a torrent of desperate denial, swirled around me in the claustrophobic darkness. So he hadn't planned to kill me. The revelation, though small, was a tiny sliver of light in the overwhelming darkness. He had cheated, lied, brought danger to our door, to my very bedside. He had cracked the door, yes, and allowed this venomous creature to slither into our lives. But he wasn't the one holding the syringe. He wasn't the one with murder in his heart. That didn't mean we were safe. Rachel's voice, sharp and cutting, sliced through his protests. "You told me you didn't want the baby. That you regretted this marriage." Her words were a confirmation, a sickening echo of the doubts that had plagued me for months, the unspoken fears I had brushed aside. He had told her these things. He had poisoned her mind, fed her delusion, fueled her dangerous obsession. My own husband had painted me as the villain, the obstacle, the thing to be removed. The pain of that realization was a fresh wound, deep and festering. He tried to calm her, his voice a desperate whisper, placating, pleading. But she moved closer, her footsteps light, almost ethereal, until her feet were at my bedside, just inches from my head. I could feel the vibrations through the mattress, the subtle shift in the air as she leaned over the bed. The needle. It was in her hand. I could almost feel its cold, metallic presence, its sharp tip glinting in the faint hospital light. A silent scream tore through my throat, choked by the terror that seized me. My breath hitched, my lungs burning. My body was rigid, every muscle tensed, ready to spring, to fight, even though I knew I was no match for her. And then, Lily nudged my arm. A small, almost imperceptible movement. She didn't speak, didn't whisper. Her small finger, cold and determined, pointed. She pointed to the nurse alert button on my wrist. The small, white button that had been there for hours, a forgotten piece of hospital equipment. My mind, paralyzed by fear, had completely overlooked it. But Lily, my brilliant, brave Lily, had not. In that moment, her quiet bravery, her quick thinking, was a beacon in the terrifying darkness. With trembling fingers, I pressed it. The sound was barely audible, a faint click that felt deafening in the silence. It was the only sound I could make, the only action I could take. But it was enough. It was the first quiet step in my fight back. Under the bed, I was no longer just a victim. I was observing. I was listening. I was planning. The emotional resilience that was forming wasn't a sudden burst of rage. It was a cold, hard determination, born of profound shock and a fierce, maternal instinct to protect my children. My brain, despite the fog of pain and fear, began to click, to categorize, to strategize. Every word Rachel spoke, every plea from Michael, every subtle movement in the room was being absorbed, cataloged, stored away for later. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about survival. This was about gathering the information I needed, the evidence that would expose the truth, that would bring down the people who had conspired against me. I was preparing myself for the next stage of the journey, the quiet, strategic thought that would define my rise. Rachel's voice, sharp and suddenly loud, pierced the air. "You betrayed me." Her anger, raw and unleashed, filled the small room, a startling contrast to her earlier insidious whispers. Michael, startled by her sudden outburst, tried to grab her, to control her, to silence her. There was a crash, the sound of something metallic hitting the floor, the four-pole, I realized, knocked over in the struggle. A grunt. And then, the door burst open. It happened in seconds. A flurry of movement, a cacophony of voices. 3 staff members, their faces etched with alarm, poured into the room. Behind them, 2 burly security guards, their uniforms stark against the white hospital walls. Someone shouted, a deep, authoritative voice, "Drop the syringe." And Rachel, her voice a guttural scream, filled with a terrifying blend of rage and despair. She ruined everything. That baby was mine. Caleb, startled by the sudden noise and commotion, whimpered, a soft, vulnerable sound that tore at my heart. Lily, ever protective, clung to me, her small body trembling. And then, it was over. The chaos subsided as quickly as it had erupted. Rachel, her face contorted with fury and madness, was subdued by the security guards, the syringe confiscated, her wrists pulled roughly behind her back. The staff, their faces pale with shock, moved to secure the room, their movements efficient, practiced. Michael, disheveled and pale, stood frozen, staring at Rachel, then at the bed, his face a mixture of horror and profound regret. The balance of power had shifted, irrevocably, dramatically. I was no longer a hidden victim. The truth, ugly and undeniable, had exploded into the open. The quiet revenge, the slow unraveling of the betrayer's world, had begun. Rachel, consumed by her own delusion, didn't fully realize what was happening until it was too late. The confession, her desperate, furious scream, was the piece of evidence that sealed her fate, the twist that brought the truth to light. My quiet planning had yielded an unexpected ally, Michael's own fear and the sudden realization of Rachel's true, dangerous nature. He hadn't been on my side, not really, but in that moment of crisis, his self-preservation had intersected with my need for exposure. And it had been enough. Rachel was taken away in handcuffs. The hospital's internal investigation revealed a disturbing truth. She had falsified her license, a carefully constructed facade to hide a history of stalking, of obsession, of a dangerously unstable mind. She had fixated on Michael, twisted his complaints about our marriage and my pregnancy into a deranged narrative where I was the obstacle, and Caleb, my sweet, innocent Caleb, was her baby. She chose me through him, a random target selected from his disgruntled confessions, a woman to be removed so she could step into my life, my family. The sheer audacity, the chilling meticulousness of her plan, sent shivers down my spine even days later. It wasn't just a simple affair, it was a deeply disturbing psychosis, fueled by Michael's indiscretions. Michael tried to apologize. He came to my room, after Rachel had been escorted away, his face pale and drawn, his eyes bloodshot. He knelt beside my bed, his voice hoarse, broken. He recounted how Rachel had slowly, subtly, wormed her way into his confidences, how she had listened to his frustrations about a difficult pregnancy, about the pressures of work, about the perceived distance between us. He admitted to telling her he regretted the marriage, that he didn't know if he could handle another child, that he felt trapped. He said he hadn't known it would go this far, that he had never intended for me to be hurt. He swore he loved me, that he loved our children, that he had just been confused, weak, overwhelmed. His words, though seemingly remorseful, felt hollow, devoid of true understanding. He spoke of his own pain, his own confusion, but rarely of mine, or of the profound damage he had wrought. I looked at him, at the man I had married, the father of my children, and saw a stranger. The love, the trust, the shared history, it was all gone, evaporated in the acidic truth of his betrayal. His weaknesses, his regrets, had been weaponized against me, and he had been complicit, however unwittingly. My voice, still weak but firm, cut through his pleas. "A door doesn't swing open if you never cracked it first," I told him. The words hung in the air, a final, unyielding statement. There was no going back, no repairing the chasm he had created. The betrayal had carved a permanent scar, not just on my heart, but on the very fabric of our family. I divorced him. The process was swift, surprisingly painless, a stark contrast to the emotional agony that preceded it. I didn't want his excuses, his apologies, his half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. I wanted peace. I wanted to reclaim my life, to build something new, something real and untainted. The house, our beautiful home filled with so many memories, felt tainted, shadowed by the lies and deceit. I couldn't breathe in it. I couldn't raise my children in a place where such darkness had taken root. So, Lily, Caleb, and I moved. We packed up our lives, leaving behind the ghost of a marriage, the lingering scent of betrayal, and the painful reminders of what had been lost. We moved to Vermont, to a small, charming town nestled in the Green Mountains, near Carroll. My best friend, my unwavering support, a steadfast presence in the wake of such turmoil. Her quiet strength, her non-judgmental comfort, was a balm to my shattered soul. Life in Vermont was different. Quieter. Slower. The crisp mountain air, the rustling leaves of the maple trees, the gentle rhythm of small-town life, it was a stark contrast to the bustling city we had left behind, a welcome respite from the suffocating memories. I found a part-time job at a children's library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and the cheerful chatter of young voices. It was a gentle re-entry into the world, a safe space to rebuild, to heal. The work was simple, fulfilling, allowing me to be present for Caleb, to help Lily adjust to her new environment. Caleb, my beautiful, resilient son, was thriving. He was a beacon of light, a constant reminder of the preciousness of life, of the profound joy that can exist even in the aftermath of devastation. His tiny gurgles, his innocent smiles, his strong, healthy cries, each sound was a testament to survival, a whisper of hope for the future. He was completely unaware of the darkness that had touched his first hours, a blessing I guarded fiercely. Lily was in therapy, a necessary step in processing the trauma she had witnessed, the fear she had carried, the unimaginable burden of saving her mother. She spoke openly about what she saw, about her fear, about her courage. It was a long, arduous process, filled with tears and quiet breakthroughs. But she was healing. Slowly, steadily, she was finding her way back to herself. And she was proud. Fiercely, quietly proud that she had been the one who saved me, who saved our family. She carried that pride like a shield, a testament to her incredible strength. The process of healing was not linear. There were days when the memories would crash over me like a tidal wave, pulling me back into the dark depths of despair. Days when the ghost of betrayal lingered, a cold hand on my heart. Days when the sheer exhaustion of rebuilding, of navigating a new life as a single mother, felt insurmountable. But gradually, imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. I found solace in the simple routines of our new life: baking bread on a rainy Saturday, walks in the autumn woods, the comforting weight of Caleb asleep on my chest. I started to rediscover myself, the woman who had been buried under years of unspoken doubts and unacknowledged fears. I reconnected with hobbies I had long abandoned: painting, writing, exploring the hiking trails that wound through the mountains. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Each small step was a reclamation, a defiant assertion of my own existence. The consequences of betrayal were far-reaching. Michael's law career, once so promising, had crumbled under the weight of his actions. The scandal, though carefully contained by the hospital, had leaked, a quiet whisper that followed him. His reputation was tarnished, his credibility shattered. Socially, he was ostracized, the comfortable world he had built around himself falling apart. Financially, the divorce had left him diminished, his wealth depleted by legal fees and my unwavering demand for a fair settlement that secured Lily and Caleb's future. Emotionally, I imagined he was adrift, facing the consequences of his choices in a cold, lonely reality. I didn't seek vengeance, didn't revel in his downfall. It was simply the inevitable consequence of his actions. My focus was on my own healing, on building a new foundation for my children. I was reclaiming my peace, not through punishment, but through rising, through moving on, through becoming stronger. One night, while tucking her in, after Caleb was finally asleep in his crib, Lily turned to me, her eyes, clear and bright, reflecting the moonlight filtering through her window. She reached out, her small hand finding mine, and squeezed gently. "Mom," she whispered, her voice soft, contemplative. "I didn't just save you. I saved our whole story." And I believed her. In that moment, looking into her innocent, wise eyes, I understood the profound truth of her words. She hadn't just pulled me from under the bed that night. She had pulled me from the suffocating grip of a life built on deceit. She had saved our narrative, our future, from being irrevocably twisted by betrayal. I am free. Free from the lies, free from the constant hum of suspicion, free from the insidious rot that had eaten away at the core of my marriage. The air I breathe now is cleaner, lighter. The world, though scarred, feels open, full of possibilities. I am not the same person I was before. The naive, trusting woman who believed in a perfect life, who ignored the creeping doubts, is gone. She was shattered, yes, but from those shards, something new has emerged. Something stronger. Something more resilient. I haven't forgiven Michael. Not in the way people talk about it, not in a way that erases the pain or absolves him of his actions. Forgiveness, for me, feels like a permission to forget, a dilution of the gravity of what happened. And I won't forget. But I also don't hold on to the bitterness, the corrosive anger that can consume you from the inside out. That anger, that desire for vengeance, feels like a chain, tethering me to the very people and events that almost destroyed me. I have chosen to cut that chain. I choose peace over prolonged suffering. I choose forward movement over dwelling in the past. My clarity now is absolute. It is the clarity of a woman who has walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably transformed. I carry the scars, yes, but they are marks of survival, reminders of my strength, of my capacity to endure. My heart, once broken, has been painstakingly mended, not into its original form, but into something new, something with deeper grooves, greater capacity for both joy and sorrow. I am more cautious, perhaps more discerning, but also more profoundly appreciative of genuine connection, of true loyalty. The lingering question that haunts me, that I now ask myself and perhaps implicitly ask you, is not about the pain, or the darkness, or the betrayal itself. It's about the journey that follows. It's about what you do when the ground beneath your feet gives way, when the people you trusted most become strangers. It's about the quiet, arduous climb back to yourself. Have you found your way back from betrayal? Have you pieced together your own shattered story? Have you, like me, found a new path, a new purpose, and a new, unwavering sense of self in the aftermath of devastation? The journey is long, and the healing is continuous. But it is a journey worth taking. And it is a story worth telling.